Amateur caver Cody Earls entered a remote network of tunnels which someone marked on a map he found online. He crawled through passage after passage, discovering many beautiful sandstone chambers and underground streams. At times he climbed. Others he slid through narrow passages that required him to tie his pack behind him and drag it with a rope. He found himself in a passage between two chambers when the waters running through the cave network began to rise. As rivulets beneath his hands became puddles, Cody pulled himself onward, hoping he would find an exit closer ahead than the one behind. Just as the water reached Cody's upturned chin, the passage took an upward turn. He dragged his soaking body 3 or 4 feet up, bending his back to squeeze through. He didn't truly feel afraid until his pack, which stored all of his food, water, and tools, caught on something below him. Unable to turn around, Cody attempted to slide back down to free the bag, but he'd become wedged in such a way that he could only move forward. The water rose continuously. Although Cody knew he might regret it if he couldn't find his way out in the next few hours, he slipped his hand down to his belt and released his pack before forging on. He squeezed through a sliver of an opening just barely large enough for his developed shoulders to fit through and found himself in brand new peril. The gap opened over a chamber roughly the size of a grain silo, filled with water of unknown depth. But turning back was not an option. He could not wriggle his shoulders back through the opening. Besides, the rising water behind him was now up to his knees and freezing him to the bone. Cody's headlamp happened upon an opening in the cave wall across the flooded chamber, high enough to stay dry, but low enough that he could reach it if he swam to it. Without a better option, he dropped into the large pool below. The cold shock of the water nearly ended him. He forced himself to swim with raw willpower. He made it to the other side, reached up, and pulled himself back to safety, relatively speaking. The new passageway was wide enough for him to crawl through without rubbing the walls. Although his back occasionally scraped on the ceiling by accident, his cold, wet clothes provided the majority of his discomfort. The passage widened even more before suddenly pinching almost completely shut. Cody crawled toward the narrow, horizontal gap ahead and measured himself against it. His light showed him a chamber on the other side of it. He thought it might work best to slide his legs through first, then push his upper body through after. He twisted himself around and executed this plan. When his legs could not find the floor on the other side, he kept assuming it was only a couple more inches away and continued to push himself through to the point of no return. By the time only his head and arms remained in the passageway, and he still could not find the floor, Cody paused to consider whether it was wise to continue pushing himself through with no idea what waited on the other side. For all he knew, his legs were dangling over the abyss. Unfortunately, his first move to pull himself back up backfired, causing his other arm to slide. He quivered as his back and shoulders strained to hold him up, but cold, wet, and exhausted, he simply did not have the strength. After only a few seconds, his other arm gave out, and he fell. Cody enjoyed a split second of relief when his legs crumpled against the floor 7 feet below. The relief came with great pain, but at least he'd found the bottom. He rolled onto his back without enough warning to protect his head. It struck the cold ground and, after a flash of white, his mind shut off. Cody stirred after an unknown length of time. His legs, back, and head all pleaded for aid. He knew he was likely too injured to continue, at least not right away, but he could not fully assess his injuries in the dark. His only estimation of how much time had passed came when he tried to turn his headlamp on and found the batteries dead. This meant he must have been knocked out for hours. He could barely open his eyes despite the low light. He was certain he'd sustained a concussion. Fortunately, his back, though sore, still allowed him to sit up and lean against the nearest wall. His wits slowly returned as he focused on breathing in and out, reminding himself not to panic. He'd told no one where he was going or for how long he expected to be gone. He supposed someone might grow concerned on the second or third day he didn't show up for work, but then what? How long would it take the authorities to figure out where he'd gone, and would they even bother sending a team down into the relatively uncharted caverns, risking their lives in search of someone who, in all likelihood, was hopelessly trapped or already dead? As these despairing thoughts plagued him, Cody became able to open his eyes for longer periods of time. He realized he could see without his light due to a pale glow shining down from high above. Fighting a creaking pain in his neck, he turned his head upward. He saw, for the first time, something which gave him hope. The moon, nearly full by the looks of it, shone down upon him from a wide hole about 30 feet over his head. However, along with this hope came a shock, for the moon did not shine solely upon him. It illuminated a tower of interwoven bones built up the wall, rising precariously toward the opening above. So many bones. Hundreds, if not thousands. They appeared to be human. He estimated the number of dead required to construct such a morbid structure in the dozens, maybe even 100 or more. These bones obviously belonged to countless others who had found themselves in his predicament, and at some point, someone had attempted to use them to construct a way out. Cody attempted to stand but found his left leg would not bear his weight. A twinge in his knee sent icy pain into his hip before his leg collapsed beneath him, dropping him back to the floor. Rejecting panic, he dragged himself against the cave wall and sat up. He straightened out his injured leg and massaged it down to his foot, searching for any sharp pains or protrusions which might indicate a break. Satisfied his bones were intact, he continued massaging around his knee. It hurt. It hurt terribly, but he didn't think the fall had damaged it beyond repair. He just needed time for it to heal enough for him to crawl to the bone tower, that grim ladder, and climb it. He knew the climb would require a lot from his injured knee, but his choices were climb or die. He did not have his water bottle or any of the extra food he'd brought in case of just such an emergency. Those were both in the pack he'd abandoned. Unable to distract himself with action, Cody was forced to reckon with the incessant pounding in his head, like being repeatedly hit with a mallet in his right temple. This constant pain told him that, unfortunately, it would be unwise of him to fall asleep. He'd heard once that if you fall asleep with a concussion, you might not wake up. He began to hear a faint skittering sound, first fearing it might be a phantom noise generated by his traumatized brain. He turned his head toward the loudest point of the sound. Sitting with his back to the wall, he didn't believe it possible that anything could be behind him, but that is where the sound seemed to originate from. He squeezed his eyes against the pain of twisting his neck. When he opened them, the pain was replaced by adrenalized terror. He saw, only an inch or two from his ear, a small hole in the cave wall, and it was from this hole the skittering sound came from. His vision expanded to include more of the wall. He saw what he had been too distracted to notice before. that similar holes riddled the entire shaft. From some holes, small black dots had already begun to emerge. They scurried to the floor, hurrying toward the stacked skeletons. And as Cody took in this sight, trying to make sense of it, he felt small bumps crawling down his back and over his shoulders. Falling to his side, Cody dragged himself away from the wall. He screamed, the animal sounds from his core tearing through his throat until he tasted blood. His head pounded in protest, but he ignored the pain as he pulled his aching body into the center of the shaft. Not that he was any safer there. The black dots became beetles, their hard exoskeletons reflecting the moonlight from above, making the walls and floor shimmer as the horde filed in. They bit his exposed skin, forcing him to reach down and cover his ankles. He tucked his naked hands into his armpits and screamed, rocking like a man insane, a status he thought he may have already achieved. He could hear the beetles chewing at his clothes. He understood now why all the bones in the shaft looked so clean. They'd been polished by this midnight swarm. This also meant, he realized with horror, some of the bones may have belonged to captives who had become trapped not so long ago. He would wonder in the morning how many of those trapped souls it took to build the towering bone ladder, how many had failed in their attempts to escape by climbing over the remains of those before them. But this speculation would come later. The night was not done with him yet. As he rocked and screamed and cried, he caught a larger movement in his blurry vision. Blinking away the blur, he looked toward where the movement occurred. There, he witnessed what appeared to be a hooded figure the size of a shriveled man emerging from the bones piled at the base of the ladder without disrupting them. It passed through them like liquid before fully materializing, standing in the center of the shaft. Cody's scream caught in his throat. The figure, shrouded in wisping robes of black, stared at him from beneath its hood. He could not see its face, but he felt its gaze boring into him. Was this the devil? The Grim Reaper come to claim him? The figure bent forward, long, spindly fingers extending from the billowing ends of its tattered robe and clawing the stone floor. As it crawled toward him, excited beetles began scuttling up its hands, its brittle wrists, into its sleeves. When the figure came within 5 feet of Cody, the beetles started pouring out of its hood, falling from where its face should have been, forming an animated veil. Cody found his voice and shouted at the figure to stay away. He scampered back, even using his injured leg to move quicker through the streams of insects skittering around him. As soon as Cody pulled back, the figure stopped its approach. It leaned back on its haunches and gently waved one hand downward in a gesture of gentle assurance. Who are you?" Cody stammered. The figure rasped something in a language Cody did not recognize and certainly did not understand, but it repeated the gesture with its hand to illustrate its meaning. Hardly pacified, Cody pushed himself further backward. His elbow struck the wall. He had nowhere left to go. The figure lurched forward, half crawling, half bounding. It stopped near Cody's extended left foot. Cody tried to draw his foot toward himself, but pain shot through his knee, paralyzing him until the shooting twinge abated. The figure paused by his feet and leaned back again. This time it reached a hand into its hood and pulled out a handful of writhing beetles. Cody panted and stared. The figure offered the handful of insects to him, indicating with a slight nod that he should take them. He pretended to himself as well as to the figure not to understand why. To illustrate the intention behind its offering, the figure returned the handful of live beetles to the dark void beneath its hood. Cody heard a chorus of muffled crunches which repeated, growing softer and wetter with each repetition, until globules of masticated beetles began to fall from the figure's invisible mouth, splattering on the floor next to its feet. Cody felt one of the wet globs splash against his re-exposed ankle, and within it, he felt the twitching legs of some of the chewed bugs still writhing. Knowing Cody must now understand its intention, the figure scooped another handful of beetles and again offered it to him. It held them right up to his lips. Cody just barely managed to prevent its gnarled fingers from touching his lips by tipping his head back as far as he could against the wall. The figure cocked its head curiously. Then, with one stilted motion, it crushed the beetle into a pulp in its palm and offered the slimy mess to Cody instead. "No, I won't," Cody shouted. His head turned as far as it would turn to the side. The figure stood, looming over him, blocking the moonlight. Chunks of crushed beetle fell from the sides of its hand. It stepped forward so that Cody's legs were between its own, then leaned down, raising the smashed beetles to his lips again. Cody could not escape. In that moment, death seemed the only way out, and he craved it. The figure pressed the sticky, crusty mess against his lips. Cody clenched his jaw shut but could do nothing to avoid the sensation of those tiny legs tickling the hairs of his beard. Sharp bits of chitin cut into his skin. Unconsciousness began numbing the edges of his brain, and whether it was death or sleep, Cody did not care. Still clenching his jaw shut, he allowed the black relief to consume him. To his incredible surprise, Cody awoke in the daylight. There was no shrouded figure, no scurrying insects in the shaft with him anymore, only the polished bones. With great hesitation, he brought his hand to his mouth. He combed his beard, believing everything from the previous night had been a horrible hallucination, a symptom of his concussion. But as he ran his fingers down, he found crusty patches stuck together. Shards of chitin and black legs rained down on his stomach. His head still hurt, and so did his leg, but the sun streaming down the shaft had dried him out and given him hope. He'd survived the awful night to be blessed with another day, another opportunity to escape. Using the wall, he attempted to stand. He waited until the last possible moment to put weight on his left leg, and when he did, the knee twinged, but not as badly as before. He obeyed his body's warning and slid back down the wall, hooking his fingers inside one of the beetle holes for stability before he realized where he'd put them and retracted them. He felt hungry, but hunger was not his immediate threat. He was thirsty, and although he could not be sure what time it was, he had a feeling the sun hadn't reached its peak yet. Already its heat was making him sweat. He'd read somewhere a person can survive 3 days without water, but he guessed the person being written about didn't have a concussion and probably wasn't trapped under direct sunlight. There was some shade across the shaft from him, which he assumed would eventually make its way to his side. He tried to calculate whether it might be worth to slide himself over to it now. At first, he decided to let his body rest, but as the sun rose higher and that shade shrunk, he decided he should take advantage of it before it was gone. He used a 3-legged crawl to move himself into the shade. It brought him relief, more than he'd expected. He also found, much to his excitement, moisture was dripping down the wall on the shady side. Seeing as he'd already been force-fed crushed beetles, he didn't think anything of licking the sandy wall for a little water. It made his tongue raw and left him wanting more. but he hoped he'd at least bought himself a few extra hours. He once more eyed the towering bone ladder, marveling at how it could stand. In some places it touched the wall behind it, but in others it hung suspended, perfectly balanced in such a way that the bones which comprised it supported one another. Someone much smarter and more skillful than him must have been trapped there once, he thought. He looked to the top of the ladder, which was perhaps still 5 feet short of the mouth of the shaft. That smarter, more skilled person likely now lay at the base of the ladder with the other skeletons. This was not a pleasant thought, but he reminded himself what accomplishments of humankind are not built off of the work of others. Someone had tried and failed so that he could succeed. He felt he owed it to them to make it out. As he looked up the bone ladder, plotting his ascent once his leg felt well enough, hopefully before he had to spend another night with the beetles and that other thing, he thought he'd begun to hallucinate again. Staring down at him from the mouth of the shaft, he thought he saw a face outlined in sunlight. He straightened himself in order to fill his lungs and shout, "Hey, I need help!" The face grew into a full figure standing at the edge of the mouth. Cody waved and shouted up at them again. Then, to his horror, the figure stepped off the edge into the void. "No, what are you doing?" Cody yelled, his voice harsh and dry. He thought the person would fall, realizing in the same moment that if they did, they might smash the bone ladder, his only means of escape. But the person did not fall. They descended through the air in angelic fashion, slowly lowered as if by an invisible elevator. This figure was dressed similarly to the person or spirit, Cody couldn't be sure which, that had visited him the previous night, only their robes glowed pure white in the sunlight. They wore a hood which masked their face until they landed only a few feet away from Cody, facing him. The face he saw under the hood looked both human and alien, both male and female. It was both beautiful and deeply uncanny, making Cody feel a novel discomfort. Yet, despite the spirit's strange arrival and uncanny appearance, Cody forced himself to stay put, to welcome them, still hoping they had come to rescue him. "Have you no words?" the spirit asked, smiling. Its blue eyes sparkled even though its hood hid them from the light. "I can understand you," Cody said. The spirit asked, "Does this surprise you?" "It's just, there was someone else here last night. They said something, but I didn't know the language, and I guess I just figured," the spirit interrupted. "My twin visits in the dark. I come in the light. We are equal and opposite. Together, we provide you a choice. We each have a fate to offer." Cody's parched throat clicked when he swallowed. When this hallucination ended, he thought he might crawl back through the hole he'd entered from and try to scoop some water out of the flooded chamber. He knew he wouldn't be able to make it any further than that, but at least a drink would buy him another day or so. "Listen," he told the spirit, "unless you can fly me out of here the way you came down, I'm not sure there's much you can do for me." "To reject me is to choose my twin," the spirit replied. Cody said, "No, I'm not choosing anyone right now. I'm just figuring out how I'm going to get out of here, okay? I'm working on a plan." The spirit bowed its head slightly, its hood hiding all but its mouth, which moved subtly as it said, "Many who choose my twin do so unwittingly. To reject hope is to accept despair, but to shun despair is to choose hope. You may be surprised how many of your kind choose my twin." "Is that what you are? Hope?" Cody asked. The spirit raised its head to meet his eyes. He considered how he'd felt upon first seeing it. Unnerved, yes, but hopeful. He pointed to the skeletons tangled up in the bone ladder and asked, "Are those the ones who chose your twin?" The spirit turned slowly toward the bones, bowed slightly to them, then turned back, saying, Some. To choose me does not alter your circumstances, only how you see them. So what's the point then? Cody spat, growing angry at the spirit's vague language. Shaking his head, he added, You know what? I don't need you. I don't need your help. I can get water from the other chamber and I can just eat. He trailed off, remembering the dark spirit holding the handful of writhing beetles under his nose. To reject me, to reject hope, is to accept despair, the spirit repeated. If you want to help me so bad, would you just do it already? I don't even know why I'm talking to you. You're obviously just a sign of how hard I hit my head. Many who accept me are labeled insane, while those who choose my twin are called rational. Your kind brands them realists, but I ask you, would you consider anyone who chooses to stay here through the night rational? Or would you reserve that term for the ones who built this structure before you in an effort to escape? How many of them made it out? Cody asked, his parched throat tiring of conversation. The spirit looked over its shoulder at the shadow-spotted bone ladder, tilting its gaze to the top where the ladder was punctuated by a skull with a snapped radius through one eye socket and its sibling ulna through the other. No one's made it out yet, Cody realized. The ladder wasn't finished. No one who's worked on this made it out. It's built out of everyone who's contributed to it, he muttered to himself. He looked down to confirm his hypothesis with the spirit, but the spirit was gone. Lying where it had stood was something which Cody had not noticed earlier. It was the only full skeleton at the bottom of the shaft, every tendon and sinew cleaned off by the beetles. That's all right, Cody spoke aloud to himself. Just means my cracked head's putting itself back together. Before he realized what he was doing, he stood and took a step. Only when he stepped with his full weight on his left leg did he jolt back, his muscle memory's response to his consciousness's distraction. His knee did not hurt, though. It felt perhaps not strong, but sturdy. Sturdy enough to walk on. But sturdy enough to climb with? Cody determined to find out soon. He overturned a few of the bones piled at the base of the ladder until a few bones deeper in the pile became unsettled, causing a warning groan from the ladder. Cody immediately removed his hands. The piled bones were all small anyway, metacarpals, vertebrae, phalanges, and the sort. They would be useless to him at the top of the ladder. He stared up at the top, realizing as the sun instantly baked his face he'd forgotten to try getting water. He didn't want to anymore, though. He didn't want to stay one more minute in that cave than he had to. Escape was so near. He only needed to do a little climbing and then a bit of a leap. But who's to say I'm not a foot or more taller than the last person who tried, he thought. He realized he could actually know this and turned to look at the nearby skeleton on the ground. To truly measure himself against it would require lying down, which Cody did not want to risk in case his knee pain or any more delusional visions returned. Instead, he reached down and picked up its right humerus, eyeing a pelvis near the top he just might be able to force the shoulder joint through. After pausing a moment to think, to plan, Cody removed his shirt and started filling it with the largest bones from the skeleton on the floor. They were lighter than he expected. Once he'd nearly filled the shirt with big bones, he began adding some smaller ones that might be useful connectors. Finally, as a last-minute thought, he tied one of the sleeves through the rib cage to let it hang outside the shirt bag. He then tied the other sleeve around his belt, securing it close to his waist to prevent it from accidentally tipping over and spilling. The next time he gazed up at the wide opening above, he did so expecting to crawl out of it soon. He rubbed his hands on his pants, double-checked the knot around his belt, and finally approached the ladder. As he began his ascent, he distracted himself by thinking of what his first meal would be. He didn't want to think about whose scapula he was using as a foothold, whose pelvis his fingers were wrapping through. The ladder felt impossibly sturdy. Considering nothing bound them together but friction and the pressure of their own weight, the bones held together surprisingly well. So well, Cody began to wonder if something unnatural, or perhaps supernatural, assisted in the ladder's construction. He guessed it would take a master engineer to reconstruct it, someone with far more knowledge and skill than a collection of trapped cavers. About halfway up, roughly 15 feet above the ground, he realized he should be taking note of how the bones he was climbing were joined. His escape depended on his ability to build the last few feet of ladder. He did not think his body would survive a second fall. He needed to get this right. At the top, he found the bones he'd selected fit together in unnatural ways with surprising ease. It felt like fate wanted him to complete this monument to those who came before him before he left it behind for good. Is that what the spirit of hope had been trying to tell him? Could this really work? But if it was really so simple, why had so many failed before him? Distracted by these thoughts, Cody pushed too hard on the femur he was prying between two other bones. They split apart, and one of them tumbled down the backside of the ladder, becoming jammed against the wall more than halfway down. Cody watched the second bone, the humerus he'd first picked up, catch precariously by his foot. He cautiously slipped the femur back into his improvised bag in order to hold on as he reached down to retrieve the humerus. He saw movement below. From the shady portion of the shaft's wall, beetles began to emerge, not in the same rabid rush as the previous night, but with anticipatory patience. He felt every one of their seed-like eyes upon him. Cody froze. The ladder suddenly felt completely precarious. He dared not risk shifting his weight any further to retrieve the fallen bone. Even if he could, he thought, the engineering he'd worked out in his head only worked with every bone he brought with him. How could he complete the ladder with not one but two pieces missing from the puzzle? He pulled himself up as high as he could. The lip of the shaft was only 3 feet away, maybe less. It looked smooth, curved by erosion, not ideal for gripping, but it was still his only way out. He would only have one chance. He untied his shirt, letting the smaller bones he'd brought with clatter and break against the stone floor below. He imagined what his own bones would do when they landed there. He imagined the beetles devouring his flesh and tissue, revealing his shattered bones for the sun to bleach in time for the next lost caver to discover. He couldn't think. He just had to jump. So he jumped. His right hand felt the top of the smooth edge above. His left hand never did. His fingers caught hold for less than a second before slipping away with the rest of him. Cody watched the sun fall away, watched the bone ladder extend in pursuit of it. The many skulls jammed within its length appeared to laugh at him. The sound of the chittering bugs below could have been their rattling laughter. Some skulls seemed to smile welcomingly. He'd chosen hope, but when he needed to embrace it most, he'd turned to its seductive twin despair. His only solace was that, perhaps, if his bones remained intact, they would provide escape to whomever followed in his footsteps. Though he'd turned his back on hope, just before he struck the ground, he gave his spirit over to it. The beetles scurried in. You made it out. Congratulations. If you enjoyed the story, please rate, like, review, or subscribe. For ad-free episodes and behind-the-scenes episodes I call Into the Woods, become a patron with the link in the description. You can also support the show by buying merch. That link is also in the description below. To stay up to date, follow me on Instagram and TikTok at The Warning Woods. And when you feel ready, meet me here for another journey into The Warning Woods. Thank you for listening.